Thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been great getting to know you over the last few months, and um, you've had a really interesting career. You got your start as a developer. You eventually moved into product. You've worked for some great companies: Novell, Markwired, Chango, Rubicon Project, Tulip, Format. Like, it's a really impressive list. Over the last decade, you've helped several companies scale as head of product. There have been some big exits there. And a few years ago, you went out on your own and you started a consulting business. And then I think from there, you also started a SaaS startup that I believe you've been bootstrapping with a partner. But
Correct.
tell us your career journey in your own words. How did we get to now?
Yeah, for sure. So when I graduated school, I started working as a developer, and I did that for a few years. And I kind of realized that I wanted to do a little bit more than just spend my whole day coding, and that's how I got into product. And that was sort of like the first switch, like career switch, going from engineering to product, and it really entailed, like turning technology and code into value. So it's like, like how do you take that innovation or that the code and actually deliver some end user value? So that was on the product side. And I did that for a few years, and I sort of like moved up the ranks, and I assumed more senior roles. And as an executive, then I realized, okay, now there's like another element to this. It's like, how do you take the value of the product you've created, and how do you actually turn it into money? Like, how do you actually start monetizing it? So this is where I really got into pricing and packaging. And this is, like many years ago, and I realized once you start combining those two elements, your product roadmap, your product initiatives, and pricing and packaging, you can have immense impact on growth. So I did that I did it at Tulip, I did it at Format and Chango, and again, great results. And then so like the final chapter, or like the latest chapter, was like, okay, now I have all these skills. I know how to code, I know technology, I know product, I know monetization. How do I turn it into a business? So a couple of years ago, I decided to go off on my own. I started with consulting. That was sort of like, again, like just to see if I can survive without an employer or a steady paycheck from an employer. But then, I came back to my roots, which is product work. And it's like, okay, how do I actually create a product out of this? So over the last 18 months or so, I've been working with Rob on PricingSaaS.
Such a great story. So tell us about PricingSaaS. What is PricingSaaS? What does it do for folks?
Yeah, so to be honest, it took us a while to figure this out. I mean, we started with this mission that, like, we want to help people get better at pricing. Like that's really our mission, get better at pricing and monetization. I remember downloading Patrick Campbell's ebook like long time ago, like many years ago. And like, I was like, oh, wow, he took this like really abstract concept and explained it in really simple terms. And that sort of like started the whole journey. I sort of like fell in love with this idea of like taking something as complex as pricing and like explaining it in very simple terms. And so we started thinking, we're like, okay, how do we, like explain this by example? So we got this idea of like, okay, there's a lot of great companies out there, PLG companies, product-led growth companies that publish a lot of their pricing online. So it's like, can we take that and learn from that and extract insights and information from that data? So originally it was, we spent a few months developing the technology. First of all, it's like, collecting that list of all these websites. Then it's like, okay, how do we actually capture and extract that data, which is really hard from the engineering perspective because they're all different. They have a lot of dynamic elements. There's a lot of permutations. And then finally, it was like, how do we actually monetize this thing? So we went through a couple of pivots, and the last one that really seems to work now is for us to give the content away for free to educate the people en masse and monetize through sponsorships. So what we found is we're really good at content. We attract audiences that are sometimes really hard to peg down because it's really hard sometimes to figure out who is responsible or involved in pricing at a company. Sometimes it's a product manager, product marketer, head of product, and those people seem to gravitate towards our content, not necessarily pay for it, but what we found is that there are other companies who really want to get in front of that audience, and they're more than happy to pay for demand gen. So our current model is to basically give away content using examples, about monetization and pricing and how to get better to the masses. And then again, pay the bills using sponsorships.
It's a great model, and I've looked at your content many, many times. It's incredibly valuable. Maybe I'd love to go into kind of, the business is about 18 months old, or at least the product is, right?
Yeah.
What are the 3 things that you've learned during that period that have been most surprising to you?
Oh man, so I think the first lesson for me, and this was just not just specific to this product or this business, but moving from a full-time salaried employee, especially an executive, to a founder. That was a big transition for me. I assumed, I have all these skills. Like I'd done it for, almost 20 years. But what I really found is those skills are good and useful. But it's really about the mindset. Like as simple as it sounds, if you have the right mindset, you can get through almost anything. But it really comes down to the mindset of a founder, because you don't have a boss that tells you what to do. So you get up every day and you have to find the motivation, and you have to keep moving things forward. That was the first biggest lesson for me. It's again, how much it is about the mindset. Some of the other lessons, like AI has been starting PricingSaaS at the time when AI got really hot and popular has been really, really fascinating. It's almost like you have to now think 2 steps ahead, because what you're doing now or investing in now may be solved by AI in 6 months. And it's you don't want to overinvest in things. For instance, when I first started, I hired a co-op developer from University of Waterloo. And I spent a lot of time and resources trying to get that coordinated. And frankly, right now, ChatGPT is a lot better at doing these junior tasks. So again, I don't hire co-ops anymore, because I can get ChatGPT to do it for really a fraction of the cost. So I think, and again, AI is just evolving so quickly. Now you really have to think 2 steps ahead. It's do I really want to focus on, creating a system or hiring people for this area if AI will solve it for free or almost for free in a few months? Those are the main 2 takeaways. The third one is again building a company from 0 to 1 is hard. I'm not gonna lie, it's not easy. It's it's a lot easier to come and get a job for a company that's already running, has funding and everything. Getting things off the ground is not trivial. So I have a lot of respect for newfound respect for founders.
Yeah, non-trivial to start a company is a good deadpan way to describe it. I love it. You recently published a benchmark report, and it was amazing. Anything in that surprised you, or anything in that you said, this is kind of the 1 or 2 or 3 takeaways that people in monetization really need to walk away with?
There was quite a few. So one of the things that we do is we monitor changes. So we track how things change over time. What's interesting is when we look at pricing and packaging changes, especially with pricing, it's not always about increasing your price. I mean, there's quite a few companies that raise price from $24 to $28 per month per user. But there's a lot of companies that did a lot of other interesting things with pricing. For instance, Nanoset doubled their price, but they doubled also the number of, pages or projects that come with that price. So basically, they force people to buy more at a higher price point. So they haven't actually increased the price point. They just doubled the minimum. Quite a few companies lowered their prices, which I found really surprising as well. Lowering prices obviously gives you bigger market share. Companies like OpenAI obviously are lowering because they're competing with a lot of new companies in the space. But other companies are also lowering prices. So one of the surprises was how many people are actually not only increasing prices but also modifying prices for different goals. And the second big takeaway was the prevalence of usage-based pricing. So over 50% of companies now have at least one usage-based pricing component. So even if they're pricing per seat, we now see sort of like at least a quarter of them having some usage-based component as well. So once you hit it, you either have to buy more credits, something else, or upgrade to the next tier, which I think is sort of like an indication that the market is maturing. There's more tools that are sort of like help you build this up because it's not trivial.
Yeah. Another thing that caught my eye was, and I think you kind of slightly alluded to this, but at least in Q1, a lot of companies, a fair number of companies are kind of changing price. Many more companies are changing packaging. I think it was something like 12% of companies are changing price in Q1, nearly 50% changing packaging. And
yeah,
I want to kind of ask you two questions on this front. Like, do you think that what is the difference between pricing and packaging for folks that may not kind of intuitively understand that? And then why are there more packaging changes? Why is there a higher frequency of packaging changes?
So in simplest terms, pricing is the dollar amount that you see on the pricing page. So $12 per seat per month, 50 cents per credit, or 1,000 tokens. So it's the dollar value. Packaging is what you get for that money. So again, like, do you get the number of features? Again, like, what do you get? Do you get different products? Do you get different add-ons? In a way, packaging, I think, is more important than the actual pricing, or getting that right. Another big element of packaging is how it scales. And I think this is probably the most difficult part to get right, because when you sign up new customers, you want to grow them over time. And if you set up your packaging correctly, the more value they get out of your product, the more they pay, right? If you have seat-based pricing, and again, like only 2 or 3 tiers, the only way to get more money out of your customers is if they buy more seats or if they upgrade to the next level. So getting that right is tricky. On the flip side, packaging is a little bit easier to change, or there are different levels of changes when it comes to packaging. Adding new features, changing pricing metrics is a lot harder. Introducing new plans, introducing new add-ons, but there's a lot of different things you can do with packaging. With pricing, it's usually, again, like you take what you have and so like move up and down. And that usually involves coordination with customers, sales, which is a lot harder because, again, like now it's like, do we grandfather existing customers? Do we not? So I think price changes are a little harder to execute.
Yeah, that's great. You've built a company that's all about monetization and how other companies are kind of exposing, or pricing and packaging, exposing their strategies for monetization. You talk to a lot of people who are thinking about monetization all the time. When you zoom out and you think about building a SaaS company today, a B2B SaaS company, what are the changes in the market, the big inflections that have been particularly interesting to you? They've really kind of pulled your attention and pulled your energy.
So AI, for sure, has been like the biggest one. So when I started building PricingSaaS, ChatGPT just came out. So it came out right at the same time I started working on PricingSaaS. And like I already alluded to, it's been evolving so quickly. And new LLMs are, keep showing up on the market that it, like, every month I have to now reevaluate, okay, can I now outsource this to AI? When we first started, I was contemplating, like hiring a bunch of people to analyze all these pricing pages. Then I started passing it on to ChatGPT, and it's like, okay, just figure this out. Now I use visual recognition using AI. So like, there's so many different things that help you automate things that used to be so manual, that, again, like, it had a huge impact on us. And it's not just about the product; it's about your internal operation. So like, there's so many things you can do now to again, like, to reduce operations internally, to scale a business that doesn't require a lot of full-time hires. Like, it used to be, like, you needed to hire an army of marketing people, an army of like other folks to run the business. Now every day it's like, do I really need to? Like, can I actually just get AI to produce tasks.
Any others? That's a huge one, and agreed. Any others?
Inflection points in the market
that have caught your attention and that have you think about them a lot. They drive energy for you. They drive anxiety for you. Any of the above?
I think in general, companies, obviously because of COVID and the whole remote culture, everything has changed. When I graduated school, it was a given. You go to the office, so 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, you're always there. To be honest, I'm still sometimes I miss the office. I work from home pretty much all the time, so sometimes I miss that dynamic. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm so glad, I get to work whenever. So I think the industry is still trying to figure that out. It's what is the right balance between the two? I love the flexibility, but again, I feel 100% remote work is not the right answer either. So it's where's the balance? And I think we're still trying to figure that out.
I agree. We talk about that a lot internally in our group because we're largely working from home, but we work so much faster when we actually force ourselves into an office for a couple of days together. And it's a really interesting question.
I still haven't met Rob. I've been working with Rob for 18 months. We still haven't met in person.
Isn't that amazing? I want to shift into, I want to talk as deeply as we can about monetization as a concept and why it's complex. And so could we start with what is monetization in B2B SaaS? How do you think about that concept?
For me, monetization is converting value that your product or service, but in SaaS, it's mostly the product, into dollars. And pricing and packaging is a component of monetization, but I think monetization goes above and beyond pricing and packaging because there's a lot more to actually get that value and convert it into dollars. For instance, in the context of product-led growth, is the whole buyer journey. How do you get somebody from visiting a page all the way to checkout and getting them to swipe that credit card? There's a lot of elements you have to consider. For sales-driven organizations, again, it's how do you optimize that process? How do you convey the value? How do you train your team on how to explain it and price and set up the RevOps? So it's really monetization for me is how do you go from the value that your product team is generating using the product to actual dollars that the customers are paying?
What makes monetization really complex for B2B companies to support? I imagine it's a broad question on purpose.
It's a broad question, but I think the number one reason is typically ownership. It's very rare that you have one person who owns this and has a clear title. I own monetization. As you know, it usually starts with the founders or founder who figures this out. Then as they graduate, they usually start outsourcing it. But again, until they get to Series B or C, there's no dedicated person. It's almost like a hot potato. It's okay, you take this on. We just hired a new head of product. They can take this on. There's a new head of growth. So I think ownership is the number one reason because it still hasn't matured to the point where it's like marketing. With marketing or customer acquisition, there's so many playbooks. There's so many procedures and systems around this. Whereas monetization remains this okay, you take it. So I think that number one issue is ownership.
Love the answer. And also it's interesting because I think there are kind of two answers there, if I'm hearing you correctly. One is there's an organizational ownership problem, but there's not a standard or a pattern that people can operate against. And I'm curious if you agree with this. I mean, especially having been in product and engineering, it strikes me that as a business scales and goes from a single product to multi-product to hybrid billing, monetization obviously gets really complex along that journey. And product and engineering leaders are tasked with figuring out how to solve for that often. And there is not a pattern architecturally or a standard that they can turn to say, okay, here's how we're going to build monetization so that it scales. And so it's kind of always reactive to the latest business need. And I wonder if you think if that's true, if that's a valid observation, or if you've kind of seen the world differently from your lens in product and engineering.
So before starting PricingSaaS, I used to work at a company called Format. Format is a website developer. It competes with Squarespace, and it had about 50,000 users, 50,000 paying customers. And when I took over as head of product, I took over monetization, and everything related to monetization was homegrown. There was no systems to help us with, so like like taking all the features, and again, like the feature, we had some homegrown tools for feature flags. We had homegrown tools for grandfathering, keeping track of who's grandfathered, the plans, packages, everything was homegrown. So anytime I made a change to pricing and packaging, that's how we grew. Like that was like the only reason Format grew while I was there is because we made changes to pricing and packaging. Everything like took a ton of time. So like I would say 20%, maybe even 30% of our resources went to pricing and packaging related product and engineering changes. So this means everything from, it's like, okay, let's run a report to see how many people are grandfathered. Okay, let's communicate to this segment, make sure we have reminders to sort of like turn off these flags at this time. It was a nightmare. It was a true nightmare. And I think this is sort of the reason why you guys are doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, totally. If you were to try to drill into a root technical cause for that complexity at that company at that time, is there a root cause? I mean, some people will say things like we've hard coded pricing, but how would you think about the root cause if there is one?
So I think like the more complexity you introduce, the harder it gets on both operational side as well as the customer side. So what I mean by operations is like whenever you're making a change that touches pricing and packaging, most teams are affected at the organization. So the finance team is affected. Your support team, your customer success, your sales team, like pretty much everybody's affected. So you have to over communicate. You have to coordinate everything internally. As soon as you start introducing complexity, where you're like, okay, I'm going to like do a test where I'm going to only introduce this to a certain segment of users. Now you have to live with this forever, or like figure out, okay, what do I do with these 30 customers that are on this bespoke pricing, bespoke plan? How do I make sure that when the support person gets on the call with them, they know they're on this bespoke plan, so they don't say something silly. On the flip side, when we look at the external side, which is the customer side, how do we make sure that we're fair to them? How do we make sure we communicate? Like if we're raising prices, we get the right message to the right person. If we're introducing new features, we've got to make sure that like they actually have access to these features. If they don't, like how do we create an upgrade path for them to actually drive that expansion revenue? So I think it can get pretty complex on both sides. And typically when companies get started, they don't think about this. So everything is homegrown. And as they get bigger, unless they have the systems, it's really hard to do. So then they end up retrofitting or like creating more manual processes around it. But it's really managing both external and internal communication and coordination.
What is the role of entitlements in this kind of world that you've just described? What are entitlements, and what do people need to understand and know about them?
Yeah, so entitlements is a bit of a techie word. I mean, some people are not even familiar with this, but basically, entitlements mean like if you think about your product and the features, you've got to sort of like figure out, okay, who has access to what, and entitlements help you figure out again, like if somebody's subscribing to the Pro plan, do they have access to the reporting feature? So they help you manage that complexity. When I was at Format, that word didn't even exist. Like we didn't even talk about entitlements. It was like, okay, we've got some plans, like who has access to what. So I think, like with now that we have like more options for building or using tools, I think engineering is starting to mature a little bit. And I think right now, like if I was to start at Format now, I would definitely like look for a third party solution. I wouldn't I wouldn't try to try to solve it through code, because it's just not worth it. Like most companies are not in the business of billing and subscription infrastructure, so it's like why build it yourself? So I think again, like this is why I think you're really onto something.
If we had to solve the world's problems on monetization from an architectural perspective in the next 20 minutes, and we had to define the standard that does not exist today, what do you think would be off the hip, like the components or the services that would constitute this standard?
That's an interesting question. I think, like there are sort of like two areas of problems. The first one is the infrastructure. So, like what you guys are building, which is like how do I manage all of this complexity? How do I make it easy to change it? The other part, though, is how do I even set this up? So right now, the answer is, like you either look at your competitor's website and try to mimic what they're doing, you guess, or you hire usually a very expensive consultant. So, and this is sort of like where we play and something we're trying to help with, which is, like bring another option and educating somebody. What are different considerations? Because again, like you want to sort of like align that value to how much you're charging the client. But there's so many different ways to do it, whether you use usage-based pricing, seat-based pricing, outcome-based pricing, if you have add-ons, etc. So I think, to answer your question, Finn, I think AI will, to be honest, I think AI will have a huge component in this, which is going to remove a lot of that, or take a lot of that information and help you figure out, again, like the best way to structure it. And I think, like the better the infrastructure gets, the more personalized it can get. So I think right now, SaaS companies are really shying away from too many pricing and packaging permutations because it's super hard to manage. I think, again, like once it becomes easy, there's no reason why, like every customer can have, like something that just fits their needs. And again, like between AI and the infrastructure companies, if we can make it easier, I think, again, like that would make everybody happy, because companies will get the right amount of money for what they're producing as well, and customers don't feel like they're being overcharged.
Yeah, it's really good. One more question before we kind of move into closing, and this has been so much fun. Imagine you're talking to a bunch of product and engineering leaders. You've been a product leader. What would you say to them as it relates to here are mistakes you should try to avoid as your business starts to work?
I love that question. I love that question. So I think, and again, like this is me speaking from experience. I was head of product for over 10 years at a number of different companies, and the number one lesson is, like, don't be shy to take on pricing. Chances are, like even as a product manager, you work at an organization where pricing is, again, like doesn't have a clear owner. But if you are a product manager or head of product, you are creating value. Start aligning your product roadmap, your initiatives, to pricing and packaging changes at the same time you're planning your product roadmap. This is what I did at Formative. And so every quarter, like as we planned our initiatives for the quarter, we would select the key initiatives that would, again, like drive additional revenue. And we started our planning process at the same time. So it wasn't like, hey, we released a feature. Hey, product marketing, put this app on the pricing page somehow. No, it was like, okay, we are developing, this feature for this specific persona. This is based on research. This is how much we think they're going to pay for this. So we designed our pricing and packaging at the same time as we started coding. So like, it was like way in advance. So my number one tip, and again, like I know from experience it works, if you can start aligning your product roadmap and pricing and packaging changes and think about it as a roadmap, then like it will have immense impact on growth.
It's a great piece of advice. John, this is a question I like to ask at the end of every conversation. What was the moment in your career that has had the most formative or influential impact on you?
Yeah, so there's been so many. I've had the opportunity to work with some really, really great leaders in this space. I think, like the thing that really got me on this pricing and packaging journey has been influenced by Patrick Campbell, that's for sure. But like I got to work with some really amazing CEOs as well, and like they were all very inspiring, but also sort of like taught me a lot about resilience. But I think like the most like the number one thing I've learned from all the CEOs I used to work for is like a conviction and grit. Like in order to survive, you have to be a little bit insane. You have to be a little bit crazy because again, like everything is stacked against you. So you have to like have a really clear target and just go for it. So I would say to answer your question, I think every time I took on a job working directly for a CEO, be it at Tulip, Chango, or at Format, each one of those was super valuable experience just because again like I would interact directly with CEOs and see how they operate, which has really helped me with my current journey.
Conviction and grit. Maybe that's the name of this episode.
Conviction and grit, yeah.
That's great.
And I'm sure you can relate.
I can. Where can people learn more about Pricing SaaS, reach out to you, find you? Where can people
the easiest way is if you head over to PricingSaaS, we'll get you to put in your email address. We promise to send you relevant content. So we'll ask you a couple of questions or find me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So John Kotowski on LinkedIn. I post and you can reach out to me directly there as well.
Perfect. John, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you so much, Finn.